What's up, y'all? It's Zach with Living Corporate, and yes, we're here. We're back. We're having conversations, that amplify the voices of Black and brown people at work, and we do that through what? Now, I'm talking to y'all like this is a live podcast, but this is the point where you would say by having authentic, available, transparent conversations with Black and brown educators, executives, entrepreneurs, influencers, creatives, activists, and non-melanated or lower melanated allies, right? People who are advocates of inclusive, diverse, and equitable spaces. And so we do that, right? Like we have these conversations. Honestly, I feel like every time we come on here, we have a great guest. And today is no different. Today we have Dr. Janice Gassam. Now listen, Dr. Gassam is a diversity and inclusion consultant and founder of BWG Business Solutions, LLC, a company focused on creating strategies to foster an equitable workplace. Gassam is a professor at the Sacred Heart University, teaching courses in diversity and inclusion, performance management, data analytics, and employee engagement. Now look, let me just go ahead and give y'all some stats, okay? All right, just real quick so y'all know, because this is the thing. We're going to talk about this in the interview, but sometimes, I don't know, folks kind of look at these platforms, and not Living Corporate is fairly unique, but they look at this stuff like, oh, this is just, passionate stuff, quote unquote, and it gets dismissed. No. Dr. Gassam has bona fides, okay? So she's a PhD. She has a PhD in organizational psychology, TEDx speaker. She's authored over 100. Listen, 100. Oh, they not hearing me. 100 articles. Now, you might say articles on what? Articles on Lipstick Alley? No. Articles on Shade Room? No. Articles on Forbes? What you talking about? Okay, she's out here. She's making moves, okay? She has a competent communicator certificate from Toastmasters International, so not the local spot, okay? Catalyst certification in unconscious bias awareness, spoken for Yale, H&M, and various other conferences and universities. And she's taught undergraduate and graduate courses in employee engagement, performance management, diversity and inclusion, amongst others. Dr. Gassam, how are you doing? Like, I just got to hold on. I got to at least give you a cheer or something.
Thank you so much. Zach. That was a really nice intro. You made me sound so important. But thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really excited to get into this conversation. How are you today?
You know what? I'm doing really, really well. I'm actually in New Orleans. I'm in New Orleans.
Wow.
Yeah, my cousin-in-law is getting married. And
wow!
Yeah.
Congratulations!
Yeah,
that's fun.
Absolutely. So,
are you gonna try some? Are you gonna go to Cafe Du Monde?
Oh, I may.
Yeah, you gotta I think it's 24 hours, but the lines are usually pretty long. But if you have a chance, if you're there for a little bit of time, that would be fun. Wow, that sounds really nice.
It should be great. It should be great. This is the challenge, right? And as you get older, so I'm just now hitting 30, right? So you get older, and you can't just kind of eat and do some of the things your body sends you a memo later like, hey, yo, I know you tried to be cute earlier.
But it ain't happening.
It ain't happening. You got an appointment now. So what's up? And now your knee hurt. You don't know why, right? So, but no, I'm doing great. How are you doing? What do you got going on these days?
I'm doing good today. I aim for 7 hours of sleep, 7 to 8 hours.
That's good.
So I got my 7 hours. Today I'm writing some articles. I did some Forbes interviews, so I have to just transcribe them. And then I have grading, of course. So that should keep me pretty busy.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, look, you can't just slay by itself. You gotta put in the work, and you're doing it. So we appreciate you. So thank you.
Thank you.
We thank you in advance. No doubt. So look, let's get into it. You've established a deep brand in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Your profile, at what point in your life did you realize that this is the work that you wanted to do, and why? Like, why did you, what led you to come to this point and create this brand for yourself?
Well, I guess sometimes people ask me this question, and I think it's a combination of the fact that my parents come from Cameroon. which is a West African country. So throughout growing up, I kind of grappled with not being Cameroonian enough, because I don't speak the language. I don't cook the Cameroonian food. And I didn't really know a lot about the culture growing up because I was born and raised here in America. So I think that combination of the different culture, as well as, growing up in predominantly white neighborhoods and going to predominantly white schools, and then also just recognizing my Blackness. It's almost like Du Bois talked about in The Souls of Black Folks, a double consciousness that Black people in America experience, where it's kind of like they have to grapple with their own Blackness as well as being a Black person in a white America. Right. And I think it was like a triple consciousness. So trying to figure out where I fit in the Black sort of scope, as well as, trying to assimilate to white America. And I did a lot of that in school, so that I would be accepted. And then also embracing my culture and being true to my culture and that aspect of my background. So I think that combination always made me really interested in diversity and inclusion. In 2011, I started a YouTube channel where I talked primarily on race and quote unquote Black issues and things that I felt were relevant to the Black community. And I have kind of scaled back, and I haven't made a video probably in 6 or 7 months, but I still, post videos on there here and there. And I was able to cultivate a pretty loyal and strong audience. I had about 20,000 subscribers on that channel, but I guess I moved my focus to corporate diversity and inclusion because I saw that there were holes in the system when I would work in different companies. I noticed certain things. So I guess my focus moved from sort of these issues that are relevant to Black America to how do I fix these issues in corporate America?
No, and it's just such critical work. First of all, let me take a step back. So I think it's interesting when you think about just Black identity, underrepresented identity, and just all the nuance of that, just of your own identity, period. Let's just not talking about within the context of any other social framework, but you have yourself, your own lived experience, which is complex. And then you're placing that within the context of being in a white majority. And then, I don't know, it's just a lot. And I wonder, and it kind of leads me to my next question, when you talk about when we talk about this space and diversity and inclusion, and we talk about really kind of taking these conversations that Black America is having, and I'm not trying to just exclude other under non-white spaces, but I'm gonna speak to Black America because that's the experience that I live in. So historically, over the past 100 and some odd years, we've had thought leaders talk about and have these internal conversations or in-house conversations about what it means to be Black. And then, of course, we've had, we're knocking on the door today, but there have been people who've knocked on the door before us having these conversations and bringing these discussions to light. I guess my question is, as I look at your profile, do you ever see or feel a sense of being in two worlds at once? And these two worlds that I'm talking about is, one, I'm seeing I'm seeing one camp when it comes to this corporate D&I space, this corporatized D&I space that is very heady. It's very, it's very academic. It's largely white, and institutionalized a bit. And then there's this other group that is continuing to grow and build, that is more activist in its function, more driven and founded by themes of justice, and also driven by themes of lived experience. When I look at your profile and even just what you just shared about you being a first generation American and you being a first generation professional, a first generation variety of ways, but also having this academic background, do you see yourself straddling both of these worlds? Do you see I'm kind of making an assumption that you even agree with my analysis of corporate D&I. I'm just curious about how do you see yourself as you operate in this space?
No, absolutely. I have a close friend who I've been doing these diversity dinner dialogues in New York City, which is just like a free workshop where anyone who has an interest in diversity and inclusion can come. We talk about a specific topic. Papa John sponsors it. And in doing that, I actually got to know a girl who's become one of my close friends. Her name is Donna. She's getting her Ph.D. in psychology, but her dissertation focuses on corporate diversity trainings. And she's looking specifically at how receptive people are when the trainer is not a diverse person. So is a white person or seemingly a white person. And going back to your point, I do agree. I think that unfortunately, anytime you're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think people are more receptive to the message when it comes from a white person. That's just unfortunately, what it is. If I'm talking about, or you are talking about your lived experience, I think that people put more stock in when a white person says those things or finally realizes that there are inequities that are taking place. I do commend, not to take anything away from white people who are in this space, who are using their privilege to amplify the voices of people of color.
Absolutely.
But I just think that it's something that's important to note is that in this space, I do think that there is sort of like a hierarchy. And I think that, unfortunately, black people are at the bottom of that hierarchy. And I think that when it comes to issues that are relevant specifically to Black people and people of color, those get prioritized last. And I think that that's unfortunate. People don't understand that you can be a marginalized group but still be racist. So I think that it's important to understand those sorts of things. I don't know, I guess, what the solution is, but it's just something that I've noticed.
No, straight up, and it's interesting too. Like, so your point around like hierarchy, because even as I talk to other diversity, equity, and inclusion professionals, right? Like something that people will jump out at. Anytime we have these conversations, it's almost like a point of pride or like particular insight when people say something like, diversity and inclusion isn't just about ethnicity and race. And I'm like, well, wait, okay, it's not. You're right. Can we also acknowledge that ethnicity and race have played a critical part in like America's formation and policy structure, and even today, like especially today? I'm not saying that the other diversity dimensions don't exist, but it's like people are so excited to like get away from that and then talk about it's about diversity of education and geography and hair color.
Diversity of thought.
Oh my gosh, diversity of thought. I keep, I just tell you, I really look, the government, I'm serious. They made crack and diversity of thought in the same lab. They did. It's crazy. Right. It's nuts.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah. Because I think it's really easy to like divert the conversation.
Right.
And that's why I think I like to do these diversity dinners and focus specifically on an issue. Because I think when you're talking about, for example, allyship, that conversation, people think of allies more so as allies in the LGBTQIA plus community.
They do.
But any marginalized group needs allies. And I think that when you don't focus specifically on race or ethnicity and you bring up the diversity conversation, I think people like to divert it and say, well, you also have to be inclusive to this group and that group and that group. And I totally agree and I understand that, but I think that there are very unique challenges that people of color and particularly Black people in this country face, in that the main way that people are able to see that we are Black is our skin color. If you're part of a marginalized group where your identity is invisible, I do think that your experiences are vastly different from an individual like me or like you, who our skin color is apparent to anyone that looks at us.
Right.
And I don't think that it's, I'm not I'm not the type of person that likes to say who is struggling the most or like to play the oppression politics. But I do think that that is an important point that needs to be acknowledged. Just because you're part of a marginalized group doesn't mean that our experiences are the same. You know, and I think that sometimes people like to say, well, look, I'm oppressed too. I have this particular invisible identity. And it's like, we might have similar experiences, but we also have vastly different experiences. And I think that sometimes that's overlooked. Even when I come in and do these corporate workshops related to diversity, I am always encouraged to not focus on race. And I recently had a consultation. So when people reach out to me to do a workshop, they'll schedule a call and then kind of figure out what I'm about, what topics I can speak to for their corporate audience. And I was specifically told recently to not victimize people in the workshop. So, people don't want to be victimized. People don't want to feel like the finger is pointed at them. And sometimes people don't really want to directly address race. And I recognize and understand that. Before, I was kind of like, I didn't really quite understand that. But I know that, when you come into a room and say to somebody, because you're part of this race, you have privilege, and your people have systematically and systemically oppressed, based on the history, people shut down and there's resistance. So It's almost like you kind of have to, I don't have any kids, but I know that sometimes when you have kids and they don't want to eat the food or take the medicine, you can kind of put sugar around it with the medicine and give that to them. So it's almost like with diversity and inclusion, you have to give the sugar with the hard, I guess, lessons and the hard realities, because people get very defensive.
So let's talk about that a little bit more. So when you talk about, and you share the idea that, that folks will tell you, hey, like, just don't talk about race. Like, how do those requests come about? Like, how do they frame it?
Sometimes they're very direct. Other times it's more subtle, where I give them a list of topics. And of course, I've been on YouTube since 2011, just talking in front of my camera about quote unquote Black issues and how racial dynamics. So it's a topic I feel very passionately about.
Sure.
But when I give them my list of topics that range from, microaggressions to how to have conversations about race in the workplace, to how to get the ROI of your diversity programs, to emotional intelligence, what I've noticed is typically people like me to talk about emotional intelligence versus and I think emotional intelligence is definitely an important topic, but it's not something that's difficult to digest. It's not something that's going to make people feel uncomfortable. So it's kind of like, these are my list of topics. And just in choosing the topics, they'll reach out to me and say, oh, could you do a talk on this? Or could you do a workshop on this? And it's never been some of those more difficult to swallow concepts like race. Because I understand, you want your audience to be receptive to it. And unfortunately, people really aren't receptive to conversations about race unless it's a white person giving it. A good example of that is I showed my students the Chelsea Handler documentary that came out on white privilege. I think that's what it's called, and Me and My White Privilege or something like that. I showed it to them. There was a particular clip where Chelsea interviewed some conservative women from Orange County, California, and they were saying people of color get privileges like school admissions, like jobs. They were referring to this myth that affirmative action is reverse racism. And so, I showed them that clip, and then I spoke to how all of the things that were said in that clip were just factually incorrect. And affirmative action wasn't created to give unfair advantages to people of color and women who are not qualified. And also, white women benefit the most from affirmative action. So I think that just watching that whole documentary, the reception has been interesting, because I think if someone like Kevin Hart or Dave Chappelle or, any other comedian did a documentary on race, I don't think it would have gotten the same reception as Chelsea Handler's documentary. And I think that that's unfortunate.
It's interesting too, because I was having a conversation with some majority folks, right? And they were talking about the documentary, and they said, well, I don't know, like, part of me is like, you know, is this just another shtick? Like, is she even really being serious and authentic, right? Like, how honest is this really? But then also, like, there were people who watched it and really, you know, thought it was just groundbreaking and courageous and innovative and, you know, all these other words.
Yeah. It's interesting. I thought it was just interesting. I think that when she was speaking with the women in that particular scene who were saying these things, she didn't really dispel what they were saying. They were like, well, you know, everyone has privilege and it's not just white people. And Chelsea wasn't, I think she could have been more direct with dispelling their myths. And it's just incorrect to say that Black people people of color are being treated, you know, better than white people in this country, because that's just not true.
It's just factually false.
Factually, you look at the rate of arrests, you look at who gets jailed, the amount of time that's given. If you just look at our criminal justice system, it's so apparent. You look at you know, and what is her name? I'm forgetting the author's name, but she specifically talks about looking at the demographics of people who were pulled over and arrested driving on the New Jersey Turnpike, where they did this extensive study, and they found that, of course, the majority of those people were Black and brown men. So just like it's obvious that those women are living in like their own delusion. And I think that maybe if I was sort of encapsulated in my own white America and I didn't interact, it's obvious they don't interact really with anyone of color.
Right.
I would probably have those same falsehoods as well. And one thing that I try to remind myself is that I can't really fault white people for not caring about certain issues, because in their minds, they think that it's not relevant to them.
Right.
So we're you know, humans are self-motivated, and we focus on things that we think will impact us. I think the fallacy is thinking that it doesn't affect them, because if Trump is spewing this rhetoric, or if our politicians are doing something that negatively impacts one group of people, ultimately that's going to impact you in other ways. So I think that like there's this false idea that that the diversity and inclusion doesn't impact you, or you don't have to be involved in the conversation. But I think that, you know, it's that famous quote that somebody said where it's like, if one group is oppressed, we're all oppressed, or if, you know, one group is not free, none of us are free. So I think that it's just that these women in that clip didn't understand how like we're all interconnected.
And 100%, right? And there's multiple points of evidence that we can look at to talk about like just disparity and inequity and disparate treatment for Black and brown people juxtaposed to white folks, right? So you have, of course, you have the prison, there's the criminal justice system. You also have like healthcare and treatment. You have access to public transportation. You have just general public school education. You have access to food. So just like neighborhoods that you know, you have food deserts, like those are real things, and they're impacted by race. And so so 100%. So Janice, diversity, equity, and inclusion is broad, and you talked about earlier that you cover a variety of things, you speak on a variety of things. Can we zoom in on a topic really quick? Let's talk about the emotional labor of Black and brown DEI professionals, particularly women, in this like diversity, equity, and inclusion space, right? Like, I'd really like to talk about that. Are you down?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Of course.
So in the history of the show, you know, I've brought up the concept of emotional labor, but I've just said it. Like, I'll be like, you know, people don't really consider the emotional labor. And like, I've talked about it with colleagues at my job. I've talked about it with friends, but I don't think I've never taken the time to really explain what emotional labor is, like as a concept. Would you mind talking a little bit about what you believe, like what is your definition of emotional labor?
Absolutely. So it's funny you ask this, because at the recent diversity dinner dialogue I had earlier this week, there was a diversity professional. He works at a large consulting firm, and he asked he posed a question to everyone who was there, and he said, "What do you do for self-care?" Because this D&I work is very exhausting. So what do you do as self-care? And one thing that I realized is I never really escape it because I feel like you had said, it's our lived experience. So anytime and I don't watch TV, but when I open my phone to go on to Instagram, the people that I follow are a lot of these like Sean King and a lot of these, the Savoy show. So people who report on news that's related to Black people. So sometimes I just find myself scrolling past stuff because especially Sean King stuff, I don't always have the bandwidth for it. And if I've had a long day and I'm just not in the mood for my day to be ruined, I have to scroll past stuff.
Right.
But also, like for me, I think fellowship is a really important part of just dealing with the emotional labor of it. I think fellowship with my fellow Black and brown people, it just helps me. Because it's almost like when you're around people, when you're around the majority, it's almost like I saw a picture where someone had like a mask on, a Black person. It's like when they go into corporate America, you put your mask on, and then when you get home, you take your mask off.
Yeah.
So I feel like when you're around your friends, you're free to take the mask off and just, explain what you're going through at work. And my friends and I, we talk a lot about our work experiences. And my experience is a little different since I'm not necessarily in corporate America. I'm in academia, and then I do consulting. And academia has its same politics, but it's a little bit different. But listening to, I have a close friend that works at Uber, and just listening to all of my different friends' experiences, I'm just like, wow, this is really, really interesting. And that, in a weird way, the fellowship helps me to sort of cope with some of these, the work that I do. So that really helps me. And also, it sounds weird, but I'm big with sleep. I always try to get my 7 to 8 hours because I think that, and there's research that indicates that when we're under stress, when we're not getting enough rest, we're sick, we're more likely to, our thinking isn't as sharp and as crisp. And interestingly, people are more likely to fall into discriminatory behaviors when they're sleep deprived. So I always try to make sure that I'm in, or, as much as I can, that I'm getting enough sleep, I'm getting enough rest, I'm going to the gym, even when I don't feel like going, to make sure that I'm treating my body well. Because there is this idea that, in our society, you're not productive unless you're busy. And I really try to emphasize the importance of sleep and rest, especially when you're doing something as taxing as diversity and inclusion work, or just being a person of color in the workplaces. Even if your work doesn't relate to diversity and inclusion, that's exhausting in itself. So I think that those are really important for me. Is just sometimes scrolling past those pages and those things that will bring me more stress, getting rest, and then just the fellowship.
And so then, do you think that the concept of emotional labor is explored enough, within diversity and inclusion, and then also like as a concept when we talk to companies and clients and other organizations?
I don't think that it's, it doesn't really happen as much to me. Sometimes when I'm on a plane and I'm reading a certain book, someone might see something and comment. But I've seen sometimes where D&I professionals are wearing a shirt that makes a really bold statement, and someone makes a comment about the shirt. And it's like, it's exhausting because sometimes you're out and you don't want to have a conversation about diversity and inclusion, but somehow it gets to that conversation. So I think that people just assume that because this is something you do for a living or you enjoy doing, that you want to talk about it 24/7. And that's not always the case. So I think that it's not something that's explored enough and within enough detail.
And so then, what does fatigue look like? Like you've been in this space for a while. Like, at what points do you realize, like, hey, I really need to, engage in what is restorative for you? So you taking a break, you getting off social media, you sleeping a little bit more. Like, what are the signs of fatigue for you personally?
I think when I have an opportunity that's presented to me, and instead of being excited, I'm already anticipating how tired I will be after the opportunity,
Yeah.
is a good indication that maybe I need to sort of slow down. And yeah, I think that would be the main thing for me. Sometimes people will reach out and say, oh, can you do this? And it's an amazing opportunity, but I'm just like, oh, I have so much on my plate. So I can't, in my mind, I'm just like, oh, I can do it, and it's just, for me, it's just a matter of, sometimes I need to learn. One thing I need to learn is Shonda Rhimes had a book called The Year of Yes. I need a year of no.
Amen.
And I need to just, sometimes it's really powerful to just say no to things that will leave you drained and overwhelmed, even if you feel like it is for a good cause or it's for the greater good or it will benefit the person or the group that is getting the service. I think sometimes just saying no or just saying no or not right now is really helpful for me. So that's an indicator to me when I'm kind of like reached my point of exhaustion.
I think that's just a really good point. I think especially when you talk about these types of spaces, right? Like, people will reach out to you for a variety of things and 99.9% of them are going to be good. And so because they're genuinely good things, it's hard to say no, but it's like, man, I'm only one person, right? Like I don't have an inexhaustible amount of energy. I have to create some space for myself. Let's talk about this and I really want to get back to something you said earlier in the conversation. So you said sometimes people reach out to you asking you to talk about specific things. Are there ever any moments when you consider your profile, right? You consider like the work that you've done in academia as well as your personal life and your journey and your lived experience. Do you ever battle feelings or insecurities around being tokenized?
I don't. It's interesting. That's not something I think that even if you're choosing me for this particular role or you're asking me to do this because you want to check some boxes, I'm still going to achieve the ultimate goal. So I think that I don't really look at the vehicle. I just look at, am I able to accomplish or achieve this goal? I recognize and understand that there is a possibility that maybe the powers that be saw what I look like and said, okay, we need this person so we look like we're being diverse and inclusive. But ultimately getting the opportunity to sort of try to push the needle and move the needle forward when it comes to building a more inclusive culture is fine with me. So it doesn't matter to me that if the goal was to check some boxes, because I'm still going to go in there and do what I really need to do and what I want to do. So I try not to think about that because I think for me, if I started thinking about that, it would be like a never ending rabbit hole of like, are they really choosing me for my credentials or they see that I'm a Black female and they want to check some boxes. So I try not to think like that because ultimately I'm like, I'm going to come in here and do what I'm supposed to do. And I try to just come in and do an amazing job so that even if they were trying to, even if the purpose was to just check the boxes, they'll see like what a strong, worker I am or what a strong consultant I am. And they'll understand that they made the right decision.
No, I hear that. I think so. What I'm taking away from that also is just like, people can choose you for whatever motivations they have. It's about how you decide to show up in that moment, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. Like like transparently, like I have those. It's something I struggle with, right? I struggle with the idea of, man, okay, why did you choose me? But then, to your point, I know for me, like I have a fairly specific brand. So when I show up, like there's a story that I'm going to tell. There's a way that I'm going to move. There's a way that I'm going to work. And, we'll see how comfortable you are with that. And if you're not comfortable with that and you decide you want something else, then, that's fine too. But I have to show up and deliver on who I am and then let the chips fall where they may after that. Okay. So we're talking about emotional labor. We're talking about, self-care and kind of, getting those energies back. I think something that's like really understated as well at work for diversity and inclusion professionals and just Black and brown people in general, right? So even if you're not explicitly in diversity and inclusion, like a space, but just at work, is the emotional labor of just being other in majority white spaces, right? Like
right.
So like, I'm curious, what are ways that you believe that organizations and that aspirational allies, as well as just leaders, can help ease the emotional labor lift for Black and brown folks in these spaces?
I think it goes back to organizations really trying to make us feel included. In my university, and I teach in the business department, there's no other Black females. There's other women of color, a few who are of Indian, or one who's of Indian descent, one who's Chinese, but we're like one of few. And then at the university, I don't know how many tenured Black professors there are, but there are very, very few. So, I think that one thing that organizations can do is just try to take additional steps to make people who are the only feel included. So I'll give you an example. I was working at a university in New York City that when I started, they said that they needed more diversity and inclusion. They needed the faculty to look like the student body. And this is a public school in New York City. It's part of a large university system. So most of the students come from different backgrounds. There are lots of Black and brown students. Yeah. And the professors just didn't reflect that. One student told me a Black student told me I was the first Black professor he's ever had.
Wow.
So, I got there, they said, oh, we really want diversity. And then they didn't do anything to make me feel included. It was like they hired me and dropped me off. My office was and little microaggressive behaviors. I'm no longer there, but I was in the psychology department at that university, but my office was in the English department. There was no name on my office. And even though I was visiting faculty, so it's kind of like not guaranteed that they'll renew your contract. Sure. I was teaching more than any other professor in that department. I was also teaching during the winter intersession. So wow. Normally when you get like a month off, I was literally like I had a week and a half off, and then January 2nd or 3rd, I had to start teaching. At it. Wow. So I think that the inclusion piece is so important because companies just look at the diversity on the surface and say, we don't need a diversity program. We have lots of Black people. We have lots of people from Asia. We have lots of this and that. And it's like, but do they feel included? That's really the important part. So I think that where companies miss the mark is that inclusion piece. So the university that I'm at now, Sacred Heart University, I think that they've done an amazing job with making me feel included. Even though I'm one of the only, I'm frequently invited, they always have like off-campus events for faculty members. And if someone's retiring, they have these parties and all of that. And it's just like the department chair will reach out and say, Janice, are you going to come to this? Or would you like to join this committee? And I just feel like last year was my first year working there full time. And they were just all of the faculty members on their own would come by my office. I'm sure they're like, who is this? I look younger than I am. So people think I'm in my 20s and I'm 32. So people are like, who is this young Black girl with these faux locks sitting in an office? Like, what? So they'll come up to me and just say, hey, how are you? What's your name? They'll give me their card. They'll connect with me on LinkedIn. Yeah. And that's not something that I experienced at this other university that I worked at. So I think that they really made me feel a sense of inclusion, even though I was the only, literally it was like a line of professors in that where my office used to be. I know I was the only Black woman on that floor. I didn't see any other Black women. So, just making you feel, including you, inviting you to things, trying to just, check on you. And just really quick, Ernst & Young did a study where they tried to measure belonging that people feel in the workplace. So they developed something called the belonging barometer. And what their research found, this was last year that it came out. So what their research found is that what the number one way to make employees feel a sense of belonging is frequent checkups. So if you are a manager or you're another employee and you come to the office of someone and say, hey, how are you? How was your weekend? And you do this frequently, that is the best way to make employees feel a sense of belonging. So I think that at my university, my colleagues do that a lot. And that's what really makes me feel like, even though I'm the only, they are really making me feel like I'm part of a family.
So first of all, thank you for sharing that. I'm curious, when you were going through the experience at the previous institution, did any of it feel like you were being gaslit a little bit? Like, did you raise any of these concerns? Like, hey, you got me all the way over here in this other group, and hey, I don't have a name on my door. Like, did you raise any of those things?
I didn't, unfortunately. And a part of me felt just so, and I'm sure many of us as people of color feel like this. I honestly was like grateful that I had a job because I hadn't finished my Ph.D. yet.
Okay.
I was grateful I had a job. I was earning more money than I had ever earned in my entire life. Mind you, I graduated with my Ph.D. when I was 30. So I was literally, most of my life I was in school. So I'm used to, not having health insurance. When I moved to New York, I didn't have health insurance. So all of these things, I was grateful to have benefits, grateful to have a job, grateful to have my own office. That was a new experience for me. So I guess I didn't say anything, I didn't say anything. Just because I was so grateful for the opportunity that I was afraid that if I pointed these inequities out, that opportunity would be taken away from me. So I know that many times people of color, Black people in particular, are in positions where maybe you didn't think you would get this far, and you have opportunities to sort of speak up, but you're worried that by speaking up, it could jeopardize your job or jeopardize your opportunity. And that's how I felt. So I didn't say anything. I knew that in my mind I wasn't going to be at that university for a long period of time. So I think that's what kept me going. I was just like, this is a stepping stone. And ultimately it was. And I left that. I was only there for a year, and they didn't renew my contract, probably because I hadn't finished my PhD, but I knew that it was temporary.
So it's such a real point, right? Because I know it's for good reason, right? So like Black and brown folks will get in these positions, and and it's more than we've ever had before. So like, not relative to anyone else, just our own journey. Like this is a peak, right? Relative to what we've experienced. And so then we're like, okay, well, I don't want to say anything, and then because this almost seems too good to be true already. So I don't want to mess this up. Exactly.
And imagine if you had a job at like Google. Google is, and who wouldn't want to work at Google? And you're being treated unfairly from your manager or from coworkers. And you felt like, I never imagined being at this company. Let me just keep my mouth, which a lot of us do. We're just like, let me keep my mouth shut. But Google is a company that I want to be at for a while. So it's like, what do you do? Especially the easy thing. And, when I hear people giving advice as far as like how to advocate for yourself, sometimes I hear people saying, just quit. And I think that's ultimately what's going to have to happen. But for some people, that's not hard. An option. If you're the sole breadwinner in your family, and many people are relying on you and you're feeding many mouths, I think quitting sounds nice, but it's not practical, especially if you don't have anything else lined up. You just have to figure out, and then it goes back to the self-care, because you're experiencing so much stress at work. What are you doing outside of work to sort of mitigate the stress that you're experiencing? And for me, that was one of the hardest years of my life, because I had just moved to Connecticut. I was teaching in New York City, so I was commuting. It's only an hour commute on the train, but I was commuting to New York City every single day. And I was also teaching in Long Island because they were, ultimately they were underpaying me. They were overworking me. And then to supplement that, there was a point in time where I was teaching 7 courses, which, anyone who teaches at the university level knows, like, 3 courses per semester is like 3 or 4 is like a very full coursework.
That's full. Real talk.
7 is like next level. I was teaching on Saturdays. It was like insane, the amount of classes that I was teaching. But my form of self-care was, I was going to the gym a lot. And I was just, a lot of fellowship, meeting up with friends, because, the reality of it was that they were severely, moving from universities. Zach, I was able to increase my salary by $30,000. They were underpaying me like a ridiculous amount. That, and when I brought it up, that's something I did bring up. When I was hired, I was like, why does my contract say this amount? And the department chair was like, oh, well, you're paid based on a scale. It was a public university. So they base it off your teaching experience, your credentials. And because I didn't have a Ph.D., blah, 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 blah. So, I did try to advocate for myself in that sense, but it was just kind of like, sorry, this is what you're going to get paid. And I was just like, okay, well, to supplement this, I'm going to work at these other universities so that I can get what I think that I deserve. So it was really difficult. I think it's easy to say quit, but for many people, quitting is not an option. So I think really going into what you're doing for self-care when you're experiencing this stress is important. And then I think planning your exit strategy. So if it's Google, maybe you want to have a year or 2 years or 3 years on your resume, but the environment is toxic. I wouldn't say just leave. I would say get that on your resume and build as many connections there as you can, but plan your exit strategy and save up money. If you really think that you have to leave at some point in the near future and you don't know if you'll have a backup job, then just plan, save up money, make sure you do what you can to, so that when that day comes, you're ready and it's not just like you made the decision off of a whim.
No, it's just so true, right? Like, cause I know there have been, I've seen it, and honestly I've done it, right? Where I've been in like really toxic environments and I just left. But I left I didn't leave on the terms I wanted to leave on. Right. So I wasn't prepared. Right. I didn't have the financial backing that I wanted to have. I didn't have, I wasn't in the place that I wanted to be, but I finally just left. And that happens a lot, especially with our generation, right? Like millennials, like, cause we'll just kind of bottle, especially what I've seen from Black and brown folks is we'll just kind of bottle it up until we can't take it anymore. And then we'll just, we'll leave, we'll just blow up and just quit. Right. And you're right. Like that's not a sustainable way to function. I think the other point that you called out is super true, and I think it really speaks to the different lived experiences of different folks. Right? Is that you say, well, just quit. Like, so for me, I'm a big advocate. I'll tell people to quit. Right? But it's easy for me to tell people to quit when I'm a Black American. My mom. I'm not sending money to my mom. Right? Like I don't have. It's just me and my wife, and my wife works. So it's like. If I quit my job, one, I know that I can get another job very quickly. And so I'm projecting that on other people, like, oh, well, you're only responsible for yourself, but that's not true, right? Like, that's just not true. You have people, like I have a really good friend who she's paying her mom's mortgage, her mom's healthcare. She's sending money back to her family in Nigeria. And like she's doing all of these things on her very modest salary, and it's a toxic work environment, but she can't just leave.
Sometimes people comment on my social media and they're like, why are we trying to change these white institutions? They don't want us there. Why don't we just build our own institutions? And I'm all for that. But I think the reality of it is every single Black and brown person is not going to be working in a Black and brown led institution. So what are we doing for those those people of color who are not in, those Black owned businesses? How are we creating an environment for them where that's sustainable? So I think that's also an important point to look at, is just like, really, how are we overcoming? Because the reality of it is that that's just not what it is right now. No. Every single person is not at a Black-owned company.
No, you're absolutely right. And like I know, like even when Live in Corporate started, right, like a couple of critiques that we got early was, why are you trying to teach people how to navigate these white spaces, as opposed to trying to help people build on. I'm like, okay, look, first of all, if you want to, we can look at the history of America, and we can see that there's been historical pushes for that black and brown people, black folks. We've been creating our own things since antebellum. Okay, so like we've been building our own churches, our own fraternities, sororities, our own business, our own communities, and there's been a consistent white lash against that. Now that doesn't mean that we're going to stop. We don't stop. In black businesses, entrepreneurship continues to grow. However, we also know, because of historical inequity, and just the way that white supremacy and patriarchy are set up, that those institutions will never be as big as Amazon. I won't say never, but it will be a long time before they're big as an Amazon or a Google or even a Facebook, right? Like that's just not the way it works. And so I believe that underrepresented folks help build this country. It is 100% reasonable and fair to have discussions about what does it look like for us to thrive here. None of these things would exist without us. So it is I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's both. And it's a fine and right discussion and pursuit on what does it look like to thrive in these spaces. Like you said earlier, like everyone's not going to be working at a black and brown place. Every black or brown person is not going to be an entrepreneur, just like every white person isn't an entrepreneur. So, most of us are going to work for somebody. So what does it look like when you work for somebody? And likely, because again, we're in America, is likely going to be a majority-owned majority-owned space. What does it look like for you to be successful there?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's it falls on both, because I think that, and that's probably a whole nother conversation, because even marginalized groups hold negative views about their own identities. For example, like there's many negative stereotypes that Black people ourselves perpetuate. Right. And even if we're leading a company, we may have colorism issues, or we may be a colorist. So there's like, even if you're in a Black-owned institution, white supremacy can still be rampant. And I think that us understanding that is important too, because I get those comments sometimes where, people are like, why are you trying to, do this and do that? And even with companies, some people have asked me why I allowed or accepted a partnership with Papa John's when the CEO is obviously, or the former CEO, is probably racist. Yeah. And I said, if this company is going to try to make amends and is going to try to, and they've done other initiatives where they're trying to really show that now they're focused on diversity and inclusion, I'm not going to say no. And I'm not going to say I'll never take your money. They've hired a Black woman as their chief diversity officer. They've hired a Ghanaian man as their chief branding officer. Shaq is now on their board of directors. The CEO is no longer on the board. So they've been doing things, they donate to HBCUs. So different things that I'm like, okay, I can accept they're trying to fix what it is. But I think that it's tough, because it's like, do we forgive companies where they have many egregious actions that the CEO has committed? Do we forgive them, or do we just move on and just cancel them? I think that's an important question to think about.
It is, right? But I guess here's my challenge with that. So first of all, like when you're talking about getting that money from Papa John's, only thing I was thinking about was like, listen, I'm like, you gotta get this. This is my whole thing, right? So I don't think that like we really talk about like how capitalist America is, right? Like you need money to survive. Like you need money to do anything. And so, if you want to say, okay, well, I'm not going to take this money from Papa John's. Okay, so you're going to take this money from Johnson & Johnson? Or you're going to take this money? Like, right. All of America was built on slavery and oppression and exploitation of Black and brown people. And Asian, and people of color as well. Like, so including Asian Americans too. So like, we wouldn't have any of this. So like, if you wanted to like, again, like I don't like saying the term slippery slope, but my whole thing is, for me, if you're going to give me the bag, if you give me the bag, as long as you know that I'm not going to adjust my message, you're not asking me to adjust my message or expecting me to adjust my message, I'm going to take the bag. Right now, there are certain groups, that I'm not taking the bag from. Like I've had people, this is like breaking news. I haven't told anybody on Living Corporate this. So, someone actually hit me up and wanted to get Candace Owens on here. And I
really?
Said, yeah. And I said, no. Like,
wow.
I said, no.
That's interesting.
I said you big
We
button.
live in corporate. We got the interesting. What are your thoughts on? I have my own thoughts on her. I watched her. Did you watch the Revolt Summit that she was in?
I did see her up there being loud and wrong. But
yeah. But one thing that I didn't like was I think when you bring people with opposing views, you have to allow them the opportunity to at least speak.
That's true.
And my husband disagrees with me. He's like, she's lying. Like, she's full of lies. Why even give her the opportunity or the platform? And I'm like, well, that's why they brought her up there.
They brought her up there, though. So if you're going to bring them up there, then you got to let them talk. Yeah.
And that's why and my husband's like, no, but she's just blatantly lying. And I'm just like, yeah, but they brought her up there to speak. And I think that that's interesting. Did you tell the person no, or you said you'll think about it?
Oh no, I said hell nah, like off the top. like all the Southern in me came out because it was like, no, like I'm not doing that, right? And so
yeah.
And
that's interesting. I wonder what she would speak to, because as far as I know, she's not in corporate America. She just does these talks, or she has her YouTube channel, and that's interesting.
So then the same person was like, well, I'm also friends with Ben Carson. Like, would you want to have him? I was like, no. I said no.
Wow.
I said no because I was like, look, I said, one, like, I don't like that association is not making any sense. Like, we're not. I was like, it's not gonna be a conversation. It's not gonna be a conversation. It's gonna be me tearing down some old black man.
Mm-hmm.
That's not cool. Because I literally don't agree with anything he's doing. So I was like, but this is my thing. So at that level, I'm like, no, I'm not taking it. Like, so let's just, I'm not taking a bag from them. But like a Papa John's, yes, I'll take a bag from Papa John's. Facebook, yes, I'll take a bag from Facebook.
Yeah, because I think the difference between Ben Carson and Candace Owens and Papa John's is that, and even Kanye West, if you want to think about it, I haven't really seen any of them be apologetic. They're just like, this is who I am, and they're going to go on as many platforms as will let them speak. Right. So it seems like your audience, I don't think, would be receptive to that.
No.
And would just be like, Zach, you're just trying to get them on to get more clicks.
For the clout. Exactly. Yeah,
exactly. So I think that with Papa John's and with some of these other companies, they realize that they made a mistake and they're like trying to fix it. And I think that's what would make me, I don't know, it's tough. I don't think we should just cancel companies where the CEO says or does something that is,
You need the bag. I think that goes back to what I was saying from the top. It's like, look, we live in a capitalist society. Like, if someone goes, hey, I messed up and this is what I'm trying to do, and I really want to get around, like I'm trying to make moves and whatever, and there's a bag out there. If the ex-CEO, a former CEO of Papa John's, wanted to come on here and let me talk to him and grill him about why he said what he said, his background, what he's doing now to actually create an impact, like today, if we could have that conversation, like an accountable, frank conversation, and what advice he would give to other white senior leaders and executives on how to drive and be more inclusive and be more aware of their own biases, anti-blackness, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If we could have that type of conversation, he's more than welcome to come on the show. But if he's coming, you see what I'm saying? If you want, if they're the current inclusion and diversity leader for Papa John's, of course they're welcome to come on the show. But like you said, like someone coming on just to being like, no, I'm just gonna be loud, proud, and wrong. It's like, no, it's not gonna work.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that it's sometimes you feel like, I don't ever feel like, am I selling out? But sometimes, I'll get comments like that where people are like, why are you focused on, what people of color should do? I did an interview and I wrote an article about some mistakes that women of color make in tech. And somebody wrote me and said, why is the onus fall on the women of color in tech and not on the companies? And I said, I've written many articles on what companies can do to be more inclusive, but I think it's also important to best position yourself to be successful. I've made mistakes in my career, and I've done things where I could have, even as far as like branding myself, I've had a LinkedIn for years. And within the last 2.5 years, I started to really get into LinkedIn, but I could have really been more active and gotten more opportunities from it. And there's been times when at work I've been antisocial and I didn't want to hang out with anyone that wasn't like me. And I think that is problematic when you're trying to advance in your organization. Sometimes you have to go to those events, mingle a little bit, smile and do whatever. And Minda Harts talked about this in her book, The Memo, about like the importance of sort of fraternizing with your colleagues and how that can help you when you're trying to advance. So I think that even as a woman of color in the workplace, I made mistakes. So I think that that's important to recognize and not just be like, it's all the company's fault.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think, and so it's interesting. We've gotten the same type of feedback, right? But it's like, my whole thought is, look, we're all grown. There's a certain level of agency that we have as professionals in our career. And yes, we're going to talk about the systemic structural challenges. I think we would be doing it's intellectually dishonest and insulting to not pair that. It's like, it's not either or, it's both and not equally on either side, right? Like there are larger responsibilities that these organizations have to create inclusive and equitable and diverse spaces. And there's also responsibilities and just things that we can be aware of as underrepresented people on how to navigate these spaces. Like,
absolutely.
Right. And it's not about respectability politics. It's not about anything that's asking you to sacrifice your dignity or your self-worth. It's about just you being knowledgeable, because there are things that people in the majority understand and they know in navigating work that we just literally don't know. And so it's about that type of knowledge is incredible. And I know the article you're referencing that you wrote. Mm-hmm. But again, I think they go hand in hand. Look, this has been an incredible conversation, Janice. Before we let you go, any parting words or shout outs?
I just hope that anyone listening to this can just look at what each of us can do in our lives to really deconstruct oppressive systems. So even if that's something as small as like retweeting or reposting something that, like the stories of someone from a marginalized group, I think that that's still moving the needle and amplifying their voice. So I try to do that as much as I can and just highlight people that deserve the shine may not get the shine. Because even in the D&I space, there's a quote unquote hierarchy. And I think certain people, you and I have discussed this, get a lot of shine, while there's other people doing a lot of the groundwork who aren't recognized as much. And not that you should do things for recognition, but I think that amplifying other people's voices is important. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Anyone who wants to discuss things more with me can just find me on Instagram. I'm Janice J Nice. So JANICE, JNICE is me. Or add me on LinkedIn, and I'm Janice Gassam on LinkedIn, and we can chat more.
Oh my goodness. Well, so first of all, we're going to have all of your links as well as your Forbes profile so people can check out all of your super dope articles. So we got you on that. Y'all, this has been Living Corporate. Okay. So good conversation. As always, we have the best guests. That's right. I'm going to say it. We got the best guests. And we typically do a thing. We typically drop air horns. If I remember, we drop them at the top, but I forgot this time because I got too excited because we're just having this super dope conversation. So I'm gonna drop them right here. Just thank you very much. This has been a super cool conversation.
Thank you so much, Zach. It's been a pleasure.
No doubt. Listen, y'all, Living Corporate. Google us, right? You get on Google or what's another Yahoo. I don't know. I really just be on Google. It's not even an ad, but you get on Google and whatever your little search thing is. You type in Living Corporate and you'll see us, man. We out here, man. We on Twitter, livingcorp_pod, Instagram, Living Corporate. And we're on we have all the domains, right? So www.living-corporate, please say the dash.com, livingcorporate.co, livingcorporate.net, livingcorporate.tv, livingcorporate.org.us. We got all the Living Corporates, Janice, except for Living Corporate, like all the way with no dash.com, because Australia has that domain, but we got the rest of them.
Oh.
I know, right? They own this corporate housing thing. But if you go into SEO, like we hopping over them though. If you Google Living Corporate, like we hopping over them now. So we I'm just saying, like the brand is getting stronger. Let's see here. I think that's it, y'all. You've been listening to Zach, and I've been having a dope conversation with Dr. Janice Gassam, speaker, educator, mover, shaker, name taker, edge snatcher, writer. What else? What else, Janice? What's another?
system deconstructor. I don't know.
Yes, system deconstructor, disruptor. Come on, bars.
Yeah.
Let's go. All right.
Intentional inclusionist.
Ooh, intentional. Wait a second. Intentional inclusionist. Okay. Till next time, y'all. Peace.
Living Corporate is a podcast by Living Corporate LLC. Our logo was designed by David Dawkins. Our theme music was produced by Ken Brown. Additional music production by Antoine Franklin for Musical Elevation. Post-production is handled by Jeremy Jackson. Got a topic suggestion? Email us at livingcorporatepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us online on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and living-corporate.com. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned.